Hello there, good evening to you. Welcome. This is State of Affairs here on GHOne Television. My name is Lantam Papanko, and we're very happy to be coming your way from our studios here at the Platinum Place at the Rage in Accra. This evening on State of Affairs, we want to put the banking sector cleanup that was done some years ago into perspective. Years down the line, there have been many arguments for and against the banking sector cleanup. There are those who believe that it was necessary, and if it had not been done, Ghana's banking sector would have been in a very deep crisis. There are also those who believe that it was not done well, and that the money that we used in the banking sector cleanup was far more than what was even required. And as a result of that, we lost. And even years down the line, there are many banks which are not in very good standing, even after the cleanup and the measures and all of that. There have also been arguments that with some of the people who are suffering consequences as a result of the banking sector cleanup, perhaps we should have dealt with the individuals who were behind mismanaging the affairs of these banks and allowed these banks to stand, especially because many of them were indigenous banks, rather than collapsing these banks. In fact, as we're entering the political season, we've got people like former President John Mahama saying that when he becomes president, some of the banks that were collapsed will have their licenses back, because the banking sector cleanup was nothing more than something political. All of these conversations have been going on. But tonight here on State of Affairs, we want to ask the question, what has been the benefit of the banking sector cleanup? Years down the line, have we benefited from the banking sector cleanup? Is Ghana's banking sector more resilient than it was after the banking sector cleanup? That is what we're discussing on State of Affairs this evening. And my guest in the studio is the Dean of the Faculty of Accounting and Finance at the UPSA. And we're going to be having a conversation with him about all of this. But before we get into that conversation, say goodbye to memorizing 1,001 short codes. Experience a complete one-click access to all MTN services with the My MTN app. You can now check your airtime, your data, your Momo balance, buy bundles with airtime from Momo, and your wallet. Monitor your data usage, your calls made, access your MTN Momo account. And all of this you can do with the My MTN app. It's making everything so easy for you. So download the My MTN app from the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store and experience a super convenient way to do the things that you love to do on your favorite network, MTN. So, what are we doing today? MTN is everywhere you go. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest in the studio this evening is Professor Isaac Boadi. Prof, good evening.
Good evening.
Welcome.
Good evening, Lantam. And how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Very well, very well. And good evening to your viewers. It's good to have me here.
Yes, and we're very happy to have you here in the studio. Right. Are you enjoying the holiday?
Well, we had to be at home. Sometimes you're always in the office trying to put results and marking of scripts and all that. But today we had to be at home for some hours. And tomorrow we go back.
Yeah.
Life continues.
Well, as you are home, I hope that you're able to get enough time to relax and do all the things that people would normally do on a holiday.
Well,
sit back and relax a little bit.
When I had your call, I had to now do everything right to come here and get you on time as well.
Well,
so thank you very much.
And thank you too for joining us here in the studio. So let's get into it right away, shall we?
All right.
I guess the first question I should be putting to you is, are we better off? Is Ghana's banking sector better off years down the line after the banking sector cleanup?
Good evening again, and good evening to your viewers. It's a question that a lot of people have been asking. For some of us, we interpret numbers, we interpret indicators, but what we have perused, but what we have seen, they are better off than it used to be.
How is the banking sector better off than it used to be?
Well, I think you have been in Ghana for some number of years. somewhere the 1980s, 90s, we had some reputational damage to our banking sector. Then somewhere 2000 to 2006, we had, I think it was Kufu administration then. We had some banks coming into Ghana, granting a lot of loans, facilities. In those days, you had calls from these banks for support. Then along the line, when we had a financial meltdown in 2007-6, we thought we had escaped the financial meltdown. But then around that period, in 2016 to 2020, 2014, 2015 thereabouts.
Yes, 2014, 2015.
Yes, we also had a lot of crisis. And if you go back to and check the data, we had a lot of issues in the country. Then we had a DKM and the rest that started over the period. Today, the figures that we have seen and we have checked, it might not be that all the indicators are pointing into the right direction, but at least a number of them are showing positive signs. So it gives us some confidence, level of confidence that yes, the banking sector, after the cleanup, is doing well.
What do you say to those who argue that when you look at the problem that was within the banking sector, it was to a tune of about 9 billion, yet we used in excess of that to clean up the banking sector? We could have used a little money to save some of these banks, which were, according to the Bank of Ghana, not performing well, and there were all kinds of, malpractice and what have you going on there. We could have saved some of them because they were indigenous banks, but we ended up spending and pumping so much money into it that it was not the best decision to have collapsed these banks or consolidated some of them. It would have been better to save them. How do you respond to people who say that? It's taken up to 25 billion cedis to do that, when 9 billion could have saved the banks.
I don't know individuals who have come out with this calculation. And let me also say this before we even attempt to answer your question. We should also be mindful about the word we use, collapse. The present administration did not collapse banks. It was rather consolidation as part of measures. These banks were not collapsed, but they were absorbed by a bigger entity.
But those banks don't exist anymore. So, why would say that
no,
the banks were collapsed?
It's subsumed. Nothing was
UT
changed.
Bank doesn't collapse, doesn't exist anymore.
On a face value,
Unibank
yes.
doesn't exist anymore. Beige Bank doesn't exist anymore. They are not there anymore. So one would say those banks have collapsed, and the assets and liabilities and whatever has then been taken over and consolidated. So one would still want to use the word collapsed. Or you don't agree with those people?
I don't agree with the word collapse, and that's my take. In business strategies, we have something called mergers and acquisitions.
Right.
Once I merge, it's the old name that faces out, that goes off. But in terms of operations, the same. Because these banks were taken over by a bigger institution. That's why we have CBG,
Right.
Consolidated Bank.
Right.
So it took care of those banks that had issues. But then let's go back to the figures again. Others are arguing that the government spent close to about 9 billion or so. That needed 9 billion. I don't know if we were right.
And the banks needed just about 9 billion to save them.
To save them?
Yes.
Well, I have not seen that figure. But let's go back into the numbers again. These banks transferred almost about 26 billion in terms of assets transferred into the holding banks, the CBG. As at that time, about 18 billion spent. Today we are talking about 21. Maybe, over time, the numbers will keep increasing. But the figure that we had as at that time was 18 billion against total asset of this bank transferred to the CBG bank. So there was not any loss in this case. We had these banks being taken over by a bigger institutions. We had about 4,000 or 3,000 individuals who had lost their job against a total figure of 4.6 million depositors. That aspect, people don't even look at that figure. But what we know is the fact that we could have spent such money. But remember, financial sector includes MPRA, the insurance companies, the SEC, and then the banks. So the amount we are talking about went into these institutions, not just the bank. But I am also grateful in terms of the figure, in terms of amount that have been transferred into the liquidator. So do the calculations.
Can you do the breakdown for us, to help us understand, your points? I know that you have a presentation prepared. If you can do a breakdown for us to understand where you're coming from, talking about we're better off. I mean, yes, after the banking sector cleanup, we're better off, and how resilient, is the sector. So I think you can demonstrate to us, you can stand and demonstrate to us, exactly why you're saying this.
Yes. Lantam, if you look at this, over the period, we are looking at the banking crisis, the cleanup. And I'm happy when we say the cleanup, and then we ignore the word collapse. And this is a quote from this person. So regulation is necessary, especially in a sector like the banking sector, which exposes country and people to risk. That is a premise. That is a key thing we need to realize here. The regulation, we don't joke with regulations. And if you go back, to go ahead, let's look at the other side. Before the banking crisis, I must indicate that the sector was growing, but the key word is that it was facing underlying issue that contributed to the crisis. It was an underlying issue. And when the new administration took over, somewhere 2017, if you remember, they had evidence available, and that indicated that the banks, some of the banks were under distress, They also went further into other investigations and realized three important things here. And Lantam, you will see that there was a poor corporate governance, there was a false reporting, financial reporting, and there was also insider dealing and major contributory factors. That were the things. These were the things that were seen in the investigations. And why I said we are not using the word correctly, and I'm sure that this new administration accepted this word, collapse. The natural fact, those banks were absorbed. If you look at the UT and Capital, these two banks were taken over by GCB.
Yeah.
So they only changed the checkbook. Major staff were absorbed. And then just maybe functional heads were taken off.
Yeah. There were some who also lost their jobs.
It's unfortunate. That's why this discussion, when we are commenting, we are careful because we don't incite people, because people have also gone through a lot. And some of the cases, the issues are in court. So we are careful how we present some of these issues.
Right.
And if you check, it was only the GM Bank that had it was varied. It wasn't the same structure that was used for GM Bank. But look at that of the rest of the five banks. The Sovereign, the Premium, the Heritage, they were taken over by the CBG. So
CBG was not existent, but they consolidated all of those banks and then formed a new bank. They took over the assets of all of these banks to form the new bank, CBG, right?
Yes, but if you check the Act of the Central Bank, of the Banking Act, 930, it tells you that the central bank has a right to set up a bridge bank,
right,
to take care of those banks that were having issues. So they operated within their means.
Right.
Now, why I'm struggling to understand or accept the word collapse Is that in business? We have merger, we have acquisition. Just like the Airtel Tigo. Merge. And now we have, Airtel Ghana and the Tigo coming together to form. They do this on the ground, sometimes efficiency, sometimes in terms of profit, sometimes because of other related issues. They come together to form a group. And we expect that at the end of the day, the new company is supposed to produce or have a key result to present. So if you look at the other, in terms of the measure, this is a clear case of a collapse. When we say collapse, remember, I'm sure in those days you were aware of clients that lost their money after the 30 microfinance institutions. They lost their funds. A clear collapse. Because you wake up in the morning, you don't see the buildings anymore. You don't get even your funds anymore. So we cannot say the same thing with the banking sector. The clear example of the DG Microfinance, where clients had to go to the bank, to that institution, to take their money. They were nowhere to be found. Customer takeover office, but Jodifor Danfo. If you remember, it was a major issue in the country. And then we have BOG also revoking about 70 money lending and microfinance company. A clear case of collapse. So we are mindful when we say collapse and then consolidation. DKM, the Diamond Microfinance also. A clear case of, I'm only giving a background when we say collapse and when we're also talking about a merger or a consolidation. You remember that this bank, they had their funds also given to them.
Yes.
Good.
So the customers had their funds. The government had to step in.
Back.
And pay them.
Good.
Yes.
So if you go forward, I think there's another one that you can also see. And this is a clear indication of payment that went to those institutions. Yeah. So I'm only giving a background just to what is called the collapse and what is called a merger. And then I think we can stay on this for a minute. 2017 and 2024.
Yeah.
We have seen major development in the banking space. The first one, the Bank of Ghana initiated a comprehensive cleanup of the banking sector. We are aware. There was a call for recapitalization of the banks. I'm only giving a general background to the years that we are talking about. And then we also saw a continued effort to enhance some framework, ensure stability over the period. And there was an increased focus on financial inclusion as well. Overall, the period between this 2017 and 2024, we have seen major transformation in the financial sector. Then we have this for discussion. Somewhere 2015, 2016, we had a report from Asset Quality Review, a report that was given or left over by the then administration. When this report, the findings, it was realized that 2 out of 33 banks identify as insolvent, deeply insolvent, meaning they are unable to meet their long-term obligations. Then we had 7 of those identified as severely undercapitalized. This report was given or was conducted, or the findings, somewhere 2015, 2016. Causes of the sector distress. But remember, this was not implemented at that period, then administration. Another issue that came out in the report was the fact that weak capitalization, poor corporate governance, weak supervision, these were major things that were captured in that report that was found. What happened afterwards? This was left untouched. at that period. So a new administration takes over and decides to implement that report. Now the question is, who should be blamed at this stage?
But people have a notion, or do I describe it as a notion or an opinion that the implementation of this report could have gone differently because there were options that were available to government or to the Bank of Ghana, rather than consolidating some of these banks. They could have helped these banks, some of them, if there are people within the banks who have run the bank down, let's deal with the individuals. Like, Atuesian has been prosecuted, some other people have been prosecuted and all of that. But let's let the bank stand and let's let the banks operate because these are some of the indigenous banks that we have by indigenous people. And so it helps us if we have indigenous people because now even people complain that Nigerian banks and other foreign banks are the ones who have taken over the banking sector now because we decided that we're going to collapse our own. So people have a problem with how these problems were dealt with, or these problems that were found out in the banking sector were dealt with. Couldn't we have saved the banks rather than do what we did?
Well, Lantam, I checked through the records in that report. It was stated clearly that there was no other option to them than to use this route. Again, the financial sector is a playing field level. It's a matter of adhering to regulations. It's not about having an indigenous bank or a foreign bank. Of course, we wish that all the time we have industry institutions that are set up by our own folks. But remember, we still have some of the banks that are 100% Ghanaian. The banks, Fidelity, the rest, they are all part of Ghanaian institutions. So the question will be, well, just as you asked, should they have exploited other options or whatever? Yes, it's another discussion. But at that time, that was the only option left for the institution. Again, giving funds or giving support to these companies, they were not yielding any result. They changed the management, they changed the structure, but the entire operation, the same, they were absorbed. If there could have been another way, that's another discussion, which we can have. It's a different conversation.
People even draw parallels to, what even happened with banks like the Prudential Bank and the ADB and what have you, where there was a certain GAT, which was available to them, to help them. So if we had something of the sort for some of these banks locally, some of them were very huge and had, branches all over the place and all of that, perhaps it would have been a different situation and perhaps we could have still had some of them standing now. How do you respond to that as well? Because there are some other banks which are also given, certain monies to stay afloat and all of that.
Well, as a mother body, Bank of Ghana is a mother body of all the banks. So when there are crises, they step in. And I'll show you the figures, the amount they pump into these institutions. Yet, we didn't see any result. Could I have pumped in more money into those institutions? That would have been another discussion. So if you go back, you then see the support that they gave to these banks. Unibank, 6.1 billion. The Beige Bank, 3.2. UT, 860 billion. All these funds were given to this bank as part of mother's commitment to the cat at home. Yet, they went under the drain. Could have pumped in more money to these institutions. So actions were taken. So the decision as to whether to have used a different mechanism or different approach is debatable. We can sit today and talk about that. That's fine. So if we go forward, I don't know if that question has been answered.
Well, there are those who also bring in the political angle, right? That this was purely political. Because in the case of Unibank, for example, we're told that some of the shareholders and some of the founders wanted to bring in up to about 4 billion or so to help the banks to stay afloat. But this is something that the Bank of Ghana rejected. So points to Heritage Bank, for example, which really didn't have anything wrong with it, except for the fact that the person who set up Heritage Bank was in court with regard to another case. And so because the person who set up the bank is in court, in an unrelated case to the bank should be collapsed and all of that. People look at all of these things and say, okay, this was perhaps political and not necessarily in the interest of making the banking sector safe and clean and secure.
There have been all kinds of accusations. And we have had instances where CEOs of this bank had predicted doom already. You cited one case, Unibank, and when we finish this, we'll go into each of the bank's cases that led into the revocation of the license. Not just one leg. There were lots of the issues. And this is a case, a typical case of a CEO who predicted that they were set on time bomb. A memo to shareholders, to management, to do something about it. A case of Capital Bank. So there were a lot of issues within that period. So we can pick the issue by one per each of the bank and offenses committed. That led into the revocation of those licenses.
All right. We'll take a short break here. Let me just say you're still watching State of Affairs here on GHOne TV, and we've been discussing the banking sector cleanup. Years down the line, after the banking sector cleanup was done, is the banking sector better off? And I've been speaking to Professor Isaac Boadi. He's a dean of the Faculty of Accounting and Finance at the University of Professional Studies, Accra, and he's been doing the presentation trying to explain the reason why he believes that the banking sector is better off than it was. This is State of Affairs. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Of Affairs here on GHOne Television. Say goodbye to memorizing 1,001 short codes. Experience a complete one-click access to everything that you do on MTN, whether you are buying airtime, whether you are checking your airtime balance, whether you're buying data, you are checking your data balance, whether you're sending mobile money, whatever it is that you are doing on MTN, whatever it is that you are doing with your MTN. You don't need to go into this short code and into that short code and into that short code. It's all been made very easy for you in the My MTN app. So all you need to do is pick up your smartphone, Google Play Store, Apple App Store, download the My MTN app, and you have access to all of this, and you're able to do everything with MTN. So with MTN, we're asking, what are we doing today? And of course, you know that MTN is everywhere you go. My guest in the studio this evening on State of Affairs is the Dean of the Faculty of Accounting and Finance at the University of Professional Studies, Accra, Professor Isaac Boadi, and we have been discussing the banking sector years down the line after the banking sector cleanup. How resilient is the sector? And Prof, before we went on the break, of course, you were explaining or trying to avert our minds to some of these specific instances in which some of these banks were not operating, as they should, for which reason the Bank of Ghana saw the need to make some of them merge and also to consolidate some of them and take over for them to become one. What has been the effect of that decision taken by the Bank of Ghana that is inuring to our benefits today?
Let me also make this comment that if NDC or the previous administration had won the 2016 election and had not implemented as done by this administration, the banking sector would have collapsed completely. But today, per the figures we have here, it tells you a story that the banking sector is now functioning properly. We are not saying that all the indicators are pointing to the right direction, but at least we have seen some level of confidence in the banking sector. Now, the bank that absorbed the 8 or 9 banks, or the 7 first, the CBG.
Yes, the consolidated bank.
Consolidated bank. We'll check that of later, the GCB. for consolidated. For the first half, they posted a profit of non-performing loan ratio, very low. This is from business, graphic business. That of the same, BOG commends CBG for delivering strong banking service. Now, if you go to the next one, I'm only giving you some comment that we have received before we come to the figures. Banking crisis. And who said this? The former president of Ghana Association of Bankers. He said the banking crisis, we are out of the woods as a result of performance. Now, another comment from someone else in one of the papers. This is a report from the another report we have received from Bank of Ghana. 82% Ghanaian GDP held in mobile money wallet. And then Ghana is the fastest growing mobile money market in Africa, World Bank. 18 million out of 2 million population active mobile money. It just tells you a story of the decision taken by the then administration and then the effects that we have seen. If you go to the next one, Bank of Ghana set up scheme to protect deposited interest, which was not the case. Was not the case years ago. Now, if you go to the next one, now you come to look at the figures now. Total asset of the banking sector before the collapse, 2009 and 2016, between that period, we had a total banks, 33 banks then. A total asset of 82.6 billion. Now, if we check that of deposits, they had deposits stood at 63 billion as at that time. This after recapitalization. The banks were reduced, 23, and a total of 229 billion. You can compare the figures. This after recapitalization of the 400 billion we talked about.
Right.
Now we have this figure. Now check the date here, 2020 and 2023. 23 banks having a figure of total asset 274.9 billion. And that of deposits. That is a good story.
So is there no correlation between these figures that we are seeing of growth within the banking sector and the growth of our GDP? Isn't it something which naturally would have happened? If the country's GDP is growing, then obviously every other sector would also be growing alongside it. And so some of these figures were to be expected. All this, and I mean, and you know, some of the assets also that the banks already had. Wouldn't all of that be something that is expected?
The GDP is driven by factors. And those factors are the agri sector, the industry, and the service.
Exactly.
They contribute. So the GDP will not
growth.
come
Yes, and the banking sector also forms part of all of that. That contributes to the GDP growth.
So
right?
if this one is
and
reduced,
there were projections that were made that it was going to. So is it not, you know, a natural consequence of everything that is also making the banking sector grow? Or it's strictly because of the measures put in place by the Bank of Ghana that we are seeing this?
We say that GDP is not just a sacrosanct or
Yes.
other factors will push that figure.
Exactly.
And those things are a combination of the three sectors that we have. The service sector, which is purely. So this, when we are seeing that figure high or going up, it could be that other factors are pushing the figure. And this is a result we are seeing from the
I mean, because I was also asking, I mean, if the GDP is getting better and people are getting more money, obviously people are going to be putting more money in the banks. And that is also going to, you know, result in the figures of the figures in the books of the banks, you know, also rising.
Well, but you realize that if regulations are not there, are not implemented, you can't see this strict improvement. So one breath it could be right, but the point is that the regulations and measures put in place by this administration, that's the Bank of Ghana, by extension, the MPP administration, I mean, we are seeing tremendous growth in this area. And if you go back into that, we go ahead with this part of, I'm trying to explain the 279.
Right.
274.9
billion.
Over the period from 2013 all the way, we had to record it to be 26. A movement from that side to this after recapitalization from here.
That's from 2019.
2019, all the way 2020, 21, 22, 23. You can see that they were recording a huge growth over the period. And this is a summation of, in terms of where we are now. And then this happens to be over the years from that period all the way up. So in terms of asset, yes, the banks are doing well. Then we have another.
But is it not growing at the same rate? I mean, if you look at the rate at which it's growing, is it not like a steady rise? A steady rise, in the rate of growth.
But then that is where we do the rate of the increment. It will tell you it might not be the same. Pictorially,
But
you can see
it's steady. So
yeah,
it means
steady.
there was already a growth trajectory anyway, even before the recapitalization from 2013, 2014, 2016, 2017, 2018, before the 2019 when the recapitalization, came in. And even before, the banking sector cleanup was done, even though there were all of these issues, you can still see a trajectory of growth in spite of all the problems that are there.
Good.
So, I mean, can the continuous growth also be attributed to what the recapitalization or the banking sector cleanup has done, even though there was a growth, there was a positive trajectory of growth anyway?
Yeah, but when you watch this, on the nominal value or the face value like this, you can see the trend. It's fine. But when you do the change, percentages wise, you see that some of the years, the growth might not be as you can see them here. So, for instance, look at the figure here.
Yeah.
Compared to the other one.
I mean, that between 2013 and then 2016, I mean, we had more than 100% growth if you look at, the figures there.
It might not be 100%. But on the face, yes, you can see there's a growth. That's fine.
Yes.
But then if you check to see the rate of the growth, you'll see that they are not the same in terms of percentage-wise.
Okay. Because on that point, I see from 2021 to 2022, there's a bit of a jump, a significant growth, and then from 2022 to 2020, there's a bit of a jump as well. But all of those are seemingly nominal, because from 179.8 billion to 220 billion to 274 billion, these are nominal growth rates, right?
Right. That is one aspect of checking the strength of the sector now. There are other indicators as well, which you can go in briefly.
Right.
So I'm only trying to show you the figure here we have, the changes. The other one tells you financial soundness indicator. If the banks are sound, or the banking sector is okay, this is one of the indicators that you can use to check. And you can see this return on asset of these banks. This is a total figure of the entire banking sector that we are projecting here. If we check the ROE figure, it tells you from a figure of 19 as at 2019, 19.9, all the way to a figure here of 34.6. You can see the same. This only tells you in terms of profits, as against the entire equity of the bank. It tells you that we have seen some changes, some improvement. The next one also tells you about a figure as another indicator that you can also use to assess the health of the sector. It tells you the net spread, the net interest spread over a period of this bank. It tells you cost to income ratio. It tells you the next interest margin over time. And that should tell you where we are now at the moment of moving out. This is the figure, 10.55, all the way to 12.65. And then you can see some major changes here. I have given the ratio, the meaning, and what it does. Maybe our viewers will be able to understand the numbers and interpretation of the indicators as well. This is one indicator to check how sound the financial sector is currently.
Right, but it looks like, when you look at how, I mean, when we go back to the other one, when you look at how, I mean, ROE, for example, return on investment, Treasury bills, and all of that I think it's gone up by about 30% or so. So it means a lot more banks are looking or investing, or buying some of these treasury bills. So doesn't it mean that without really doing much work and just investing in the treasury bills, it's going to significantly make us see the figures that we are seeing now?
I don't know the proportion of the portfolio that are into treasury bills at the moment.
From the banks.
For the banks. But of course, one wants to invest in the safe haven, trying to find a better place because
and the subscription of treasury bills has significantly increased. I think it's gone up by about 30% or so.
Well, I think it's around that.
I mean, the interest rates.
Yes,
on
but we
bills.
can't solely say that the banks are lazy. All that they are doing is to invest in an area where they have higher returns and to show out this figure. That might not be a clear case. But then there could be a proportion of it because banks receive deposit. And deposit they receive, they are supposed to find other investment vehicles to place the funds in.
Right.
So there's nothing wrong if they have to place funds in those areas. Remember, they give loans to other people. And the ability to collect the loans also tell you how efficient your bank you are. So it's part of things that indicator that we are using. It's one of the indicators. There's another indicator that we can also use to also judge the performance of this bank. So that happens.
But when you look at the year 2022, we are looking at minus 25.48.
Right.
Is that not a blot on this whole banking sector cleanup?
You remember,
or because of the DDEP, or
I'm sure you
COVID-19, or Russia, Ukraine, or whatever it is. But we are recording some negatives in the year 2022.
And that runs through the indicator here.
Yes.
And you said it right. Whatever happens in the other part of the world, we are affected one way or the other. And it's a clear example of what happened. Immediately after that, look at the figure here. Whatever happened in the other part of the world, we're affected. And we have seen our part of the issue. So we can understand. And these are the thresholds. So we can look at the other one. I think I've explained this one as well.
Yeah.
Then we have this indicator. You can see already is a bit high. If you check the threshold,
yes,
it should be within that figure. It tells you that, yes, at this stage, we are still recovering from this effect around that period. Loans, we have issues. The bank also are still having issues with it. But even with that, it's now 20. It's a bit high. It's supposed not to be at this figure.
Yes.
So you realize that it might not be all the indicators that will point, I said from the beginning, will point to the right direction. But then, when we go through a crisis like we went through, of course, in terms of payment, we'll struggle a bit. But that does not negate the fact that the banks are not doing well.
Right. But are we not probably returning back to the era where the banks are not doing very well? Because we are seeing, a low ratio of non-performing loans. I mean, a high ratio of non-performing loans, right? So it means that people are taking loans and, people are not able to pay the loans and all of that. So is that not a problem? Because at least not some of the problems that we began to see, before, 2016 and even before 2017 when we decided to do the banking sector cleanup, that led to us being able to, or us having to do, according to the Bank of Ghana, some of these things. Are we not beginning to see some of those things play out now, looking at the non-performing loans, the high rates of non-performing loans, among other things?
Let me say, Lantam, that no bank would have a 0% when it comes to loan quality or assets of the loans you give out. There cannot be a zero. There will always be a figure. But your ability to collect the loans makes you a good bank. All right. If we check the report of the infractions that took place in those banks, there was solely insolvency, liquidity, and infractions, the related party transactions. These were predominantly major issues that took place.
Right.
quality of a loan. If you give a loan to a client, and that was a case with GHOne Bank, the accusation, the administration is being accused that they gave money to contractors
Yes.
and they failed to pay. Good.
And some of those contractors were doing work for government.
For government.
Yes.
Good. But let me tell you, my brother, in credit, we have the 5 C's: the collateral, the character, conditions. I forgot about the 2. Whenever you are giving loan, you have to check all this before you give loans. You don't give loan to me and don't take a collateral from me. That's a failure. It's a failure. Because if you give loan to a client, you must have a fallback position in case you have a problem. What are you going to take as an asset? To liquidate and take your money back. So, West, of course, government took money from those people. I mean, gave contract, never paid them. But if you go and check the money they're even talking about, it's not up to the collateral, I mean, the capitalization we are talking about, of 400 something. And the decision to revoke their license was mainly on the capitalization,
Right.
the infractions,
Right.
the third-party transactions.
Okay. So, in essence, what you are pointing us to is the fact that the banking sector cleanup was good for us based on some of these figures that we're looking at. That is what we are being pointed to. And this is interesting. You're still watching State of Affairs here on GHOne Television. We've got a few minutes more to wrap up, and you've been looking at that presentation. So stay tuned. When we return, I'll be wrapping up our conversation here on the show. We'll be right back. Welcome back to State of Affairs here on GHOne Television. And we're just on the last leg of our discussions today. We've been talking about the banking sector cleanup, and we've been asking the question whether or not we are better off than we were before we did the banking sector cleanup. And let's remind you that you can download the My MTN app and do everything that you need to do with MTN on the My MTN app, from checking your Momo to sending Momo to buying data to buying credits to buying airtime to whatever it is you want to do. Just download the My MTN app, or from the Google Play Store or from the Apple App Store, and then we're good to go. Let's get to the very end of our conversation this evening. Prof, let me come back to you for your final comments on the conversation that we've been having, your final word on the conversation we've been having about the banking sector cleanup and whether or not it's more resilient than it was.
Yes, I must say that this administration, the central bank, the BOG, by extension, the government, is being described, in my case, as an angel in the devil's box. All right. That's how it's being described. That's why they have lashed or used the word collapse. It's being used wrongly.
Right.
And it's time for some of us. We teach students. And we need to say the right thing.
Okay.
Because the elections or whatever we do now will be premised on facts. And that's what we are doing at this moment.
All right.
So this government saved the banking sector. They didn't collapse the banking sector.
Okay. Well, on that note, we'll wrap up State of Affairs this evening here on GHOne Television. Professor Isaac Boadi, thank you very much for joining us in the studio.
Thank you.
And thank you for that presentation. Prof is the Dean of the Faculty of Accounting and Finance at the University of Professional Studies, Accra, joining us for State of Affairs this evening. This is where we'll end it. My name is Lantam Papanko. Have a good evening.